welcome to episode 24 of March to the Sea, the Vandals Let's Play series for Total War Attila. Last time, Gunderic, shocked by the news of the death of Saphrax the Pious, led a bloody all-out assault on the port of Trebizond, resulting in thousands dead on both sides and the city left a smoking ruin. A new Saphrax was put in charge of the Thunder and Lightning, and although he resembled the former General Saphrax the Pious in name only, the army was restored to its fighting strength under his shaky command. Argebaud and the Solitude repelled an enormous Sassanid assault outside the walls of Edessa with the assistance of Vitharicus and the Madness. After pushing forward to capture Amida, Argebaud then crippled the Sassanid counterattack in a surprise night assault, destroying one of their three armies and driving apart the other two. Ismas and his brothers of stone continued their march up the Phoenician coastline to recolonize Aelia Capitolina, the fifth patriarchal seat, moving swiftly to outpace the tremendous Eastern Roman forces at Aila. Indolf and his forces in Europe managed to cut off Attila's escape route from a mountain pass near Aquileia, but the Huns forced Swinthila back westward before confronting and destroying the giants in the mountains. Free of the mountain pass, but nevertheless severely weakened, Attila again finds himself maneuvering to escape Indolf as the Vandals and Huns alternately trade roles of hunters and hunted. I wanted to take a moment this episode to take a look at the family tree, in part to review the characters, and in part to show just how convoluted and even incestuous it's gotten. At the top of the tree is the now deceased patriarch Gunderic, father of the current king Gunderic and his brother Gunderic, the high judge and governor of Carthage. Gunderic also has a number of adopted children, all of whom are now deceased, including the former Iberian governors Radagaisus and Gislic, the former general of the Solitude, Attila, and an adopted daughter in Gunthus who was married to the now widowed Indolf. Their deceased son, Thorsimund, was married to one of the Eastern Roman princesses, Comina Flavia Attila, who still appears in the family tree. She has the very excellent, efficient trait, so would be a great candidate to marry one of my governors or generals, but we'll come back to her at the end of this discussion. Radagaisus appears in the family tree twice, because his son, also named Gunderic after his benefactor, is married to Gislic's daughter Amalsuentha. What is even a little bit more disconcerting is that, even though it isn't shown here, Gislic was married to Radagaisus' widow, so these two are actually half-siblings in reality. The other adopted son of Gunderic, Attila, has two sons of his own, the brothers Ascaric, the governor of Insulae Orientalis, and Alaric, the governor of Macedonia. The reason that Gunderic shows up on this part of the family tree is because of Aelia Eudoxia, the Eastern Roman Dowager Empress, formerly the wife of Arcadius, who has many sons and daughters of her own from her former marriage. Aelia Eudoxia was remarried to Alaric, who has a couple of bastard children of his own but no legitimate sons or daughters. However, Aelia Eudoxia's daughters, including the aforementioned Comina Flavia Attila, the widow of Thorsimund, along with Curiatia Piso, who is married to Gunderic's son Gripas. Aelia Eudoxia's three sons include the former and current Eastern Roman emperors Vindonius Helva and Publius Vespasianus, respectively. Ganseric's branch of the tree is less confusing, mostly because he has several daughters that have been married off to various faction leaders, but only one noteworthy illegitimate son, Hermenegild, who has inherited the Children of the Forest from the ruthless Visimar, who surprisingly was never given a place on the family tree for all his contributions. Gunderic, by contrast, has sired several legitimate sons by his superstitious Quadian wife Veneranda, and many of them have had stellar military careers, including Alavivus, who conquered Macedonia but is now tragically deceased, and Argebaud, who has carried on the work of Saphrax the Pious in the east. Gripas, who is married to Aelia Eudoxia's daughter Curiatia Piso, has taken on the command of the Carian Crows, while Hunneric languishes in Britain with the Rivers of Blood. There are many more great-grandsons and great-granddaughters of Gunderic who will likely come of age before the end of the campaign, but we'll leave them aside for now. One last thing I did notice, however, is that the young Eastern Roman Emperor Publius Vespasianus is an eligible bachelor, and shockingly, he's quite willing to commit to a marriage to his own widowed sister, Comina Flavia Attila. However, in doing so would remove her from our family tree and quite possibly cause the Total War Attila game engine to divide by 0, so in the end I did not make this brother-sister betrothal a reality. Nevertheless, it looks as if the Vandals and the Eastern Romans will be ringing in the Byzantine Age with the characteristically Byzantine family tree. Elia Eudoxia is driving me mad with these plans for the Vandalic romantic feast celebration. I know she has her decorous reputation to maintain.
Oh my good sir, you can't have a proper celebration without proper etiquette. And etiquette begins with the seating arrangements.
Oh, obviously, Giselic and Radagaisus have made their end of the table easy, no question about who is sitting with who there. But is Indolf still invited? And where do I seat Commona Flavia Attila? With Gunderic's family?
Don't put her anywhere near Publius Vespasianus. There's something funny going on between those two.
Ankara, my lone settlement in Anatolia, remains under siege by the Afrigids, and they are unfortunately not at war with my nearby Asian allies at Nicomedia. The Asians will take care of the rebels, but I must manage the Afrigids on my own. So I put Scarillo to work encouraging a mutiny among the Afrigid force, hoping this will produce a splinter faction as it did with the Garamantians. She gets a critical success for her efforts, and as you can see, a mutiny is predicted to occur in 2 turns. A little further east, enemies are still swarming, with the Kartli at the walls of Amida, the Sassanids regrouping at Nisibis, and a huge rebel army across the river from Edessa. Our new general, Saphrax the Pretender, bolsters his army with still more mercenaries, the force now containing more Persians than Vandals. Even so, Saphrax's deep pockets and recent victories have made him popular among the men, as the army has a very high integrity. With the new mercenary, Saphrax is able to drive the Sassanid army, the brothers-in-arms, away from Edessa, forcing them to retreat across the river. He then does the same to the rebel Orion's forces, pushing them back to Amida. I initially decided to pursue the rebels, but then changed my mind, seeing that the weak Amida garrison would not be very helpful in the attack. So Saphrax instead garrisons the walls of Amida against the numerous enemies there. Ethan destroys a rival agent, a Zoroastrian holy man from the Sassanids east of Edessa. Back in Europe, Indolf and Hermenegild relentlessly pursue Attila northward, nearly reaching his army, but they're not quite able to catch up to him this turn. I am, however, able to hinder the movement of the weakened consorts of Amazonia with Venetha Haris, and further reduce their numbers with Kyrillos. The Seekers of Glory switched places with the Carian Crows at Casurgis, with the Seekers pausing inside the city to replenish, and the Carian Crows venturing south to close on Attila and his hordes. During the in-turn phase, the Jutes gather their forces and surround Attila south of Casurgis. The attack is led by the Jute armies, but Gripas and the Carian Crows are close enough to assist, so they will be joining the battle. Gripas is approaching from the northeastern corner of the map, while the main Jute army is gathered in the center of the deployment zone, with their own reinforcing armies moving in from each flank. The Carian Crows advance through the forest to join the Jute front line, and once there, the unified front begins moving toward the enemy's position. They're somewhere in the south, but their exact location is obscured by the dense fog on the battlefield. We catch our first glimpse of the Huns approaching the western flank with several missile cavalry skirmishing in front of their force. I start bringing the Carian Crows up quickly to assist the Jutes, who are a little too far out in front, and already becoming engaged. Fortunately, they have several units of spearmen and javelins that should be able to inflict serious damage on the Huns. More Huns on horseback emerge through the trees, as our front line of spearmen lock their shields to receive the charges from the depleted regiments of Knockors and noble steppe cataphracts. It's not long before the gloomy forest is illuminated by the flicker of flaming arrows launched overhead by our longbowmen. Some of the arrows lodge among the tree limbs overhead, and a small blaze erupts in the trees, and at the sight of the fire the Hunnic horses begin rolling their eyes in terror, the units of Hunnic cavalry wavering. As the wave of Hunnic shock cavalry are repelled, my cavalry begins circling around the eastern flank to the edge of the forest. Attila's bodyguard has been broken, and the enemy general himself has received a wicked injury from a Jute axe. Fresh off his victory, the Jute warlord hefts his two-handed axe and leads his men in a headlong charge at the other Hunnic chieftain, quickly dispatching that regiment as well, with the assistance from a few javelin volleys from the nearby Jute skirmishers. There are still more than a few dangerous Hunnic horse archers, devil archers, and uniguards skirmishing in the forest, and our front line of spears advance while the pincers on each flank, composed of the Jute forces and my cavalry, close in on the remaining enemy. Most of the mounted Hunnic archers are caught, but several units are scattered to the edges of the map, pursued by my cavalry. After a protracted pursuit, the remainder of the enemy units are either destroyed or shattered, and we gain a decisive victory thanks to our Jute allies. The Jutes suffered some heavy losses, over half their combined force, but we only lost a smattering of Vandals in the assault. Attila's horde is utterly destroyed, but for the king himself, and the accompanying horde falls back, only to be swiftly eradicated before the end of the Jute's turn. Our celebration is short-lived, however, as the Middle East remains in as much turmoil as ever, more Sassanid armies pouring forward to engage Argebaud outside Edessa. Even with Vithericus' reinforcements, their combined strength is too much to face, so Argebaud falls back, fortunately out of range of their pursuit, while yet another Sassanid army approaches Edessa from the east to lay siege to its walls. At the start of our following turn, we learn that the Admiral of the Black Waters, Dromiate, has passed away from natural causes, and I have to choose another admiral from the pool of available statesmen to oversee the navy. None of the options are particularly appealing, but I settle on Liuva, an experienced cavalry officer, to take command of the ships. I don't have any particular reason for selecting him other than his young age and the fact that I might be able to swap him out with another general who would be more suited for the navy at some point. In spite of my victories over the Sassanids last episode, they've managed to conjure up another powerful army at Edessa, and the situation on our Middle Eastern frontier is at crisis levels. I start by bringing Argebaud around to engage the army besieging Edessa itself, who are just out of range of reinforcement by their comrades. Given this, Argebaud calls on the reinforcements from the city to help with the assault. I probably should have fought this battle manually, but I felt that the balance bar was not giving me the right result, due to my large numerical advantage, so I auto-resolved the battle. And I did manage to secure a decisive victory, although with some moderately heavy losses, including 2 whole units of Spearmasters destroyed. Fortunately, this automatic result totally wipes out the enemy army, and I don't have to chase down their fleeing cavalry. I merge the remaining Spearmasters and Persian mercenary cavalry, and I add even more mercenaries to the Solitude. They aren't at full strength, but at least they are somewhat formidable again. And in fact, they're able to challenge the smallest Sassanid army at the river south of Edessa in a night battle, maintaining a heavy advantage on the balance bar thanks to Argebaud's night battle ability. Another decisive victory with acceptable losses destroys a second Sassanid army, and it forces the other 2 apart. I feel that I've used Argebaud to his best potential at this point, and I move him back to the walls of Edessa. At Ankara, Skrilo has nearly caused a mutiny in the besieging Afrajit army, but as you can see, they're avoiding this by decimating their force, which is already quite weakened from attrition. Our Asian allies have wiped out the rebels, but unfortunately they won't engage the Afrajid, so I'm stuck with their army encircling Ankara for a while longer. I've got the money this turn to purchase heavy cavalry tactics, which I need to get the final cavalry upgrades and which is a prerequisite for the final tier of military technologies, so I pause my research on weapon mastery, which has 3 turns left, to pick up heavy cavalry tactics. With Attila sent back to the Far East by his recent defeat and injury, I start moving my forces back to the eastern border of Casurgis to defend our frontier, with Godegisel and the Seekers of Glory leading the way, followed by the Children of the Forest and the Oath. For Manfred and the Glorious Reavers fall back to Casurgis, where they regroup, recruit, and replenish. Hethan and Venethaharis both scout eastward in their respective regions, Venethaharis finding nothing but desolation, but Hethan locating a couple more, albeit smaller, Sassanid armies near Nisibis. During the end-turn phase, the Sassanids strike back against Argebaud and Edessa, but the combined strength of the Solitude and the reinforcing armies led by Vithericus and Saphrax gives me a significant advantage on the balance bar. I choose another auto-resolve for this one, feeling that we've seen plenty of Sassanid battles lately, and we do manage to cripple the attacking Sassanids with a decisive victory, although we take heavy losses in the process. I had thought that reinforcing Edessa with the Thunder and Lightning meant essentially giving Amida to the rebels, but the large Orien's army surprisingly turned south from Amida to throw themselves against the walls of Edessa, where I have a sizable advantage thanks to all of my reinforcing armies. We're able to dispatch the rebels and hang on to Amida, which I did not think would be possible. A few more Huns move in from the east, destroying an army of the Angles, but Attila has yet to re-emerge. I still have problems with the consumption spreading among my armies around Edessa, but fortunately it seems that the disease has finally passed from the city itself. Argebaud takes what remains of the Solitude, almost entirely a mercenary army by this point, and brings them across the river to Antioch, where the weakened Sassanid armies have fled. Weakened and fatigued, the Sassanids pose no obstacle, and Argebaud dispatches both armies with minimal losses. I leave the Solitude in Antioch to regroup. The Thunder and Lightning, battered as they are in no position to garrison Amida since their diseased and depleted ranks are not replenishing, so I wind up leaving Saphrax outside Edessa. The Oath and the Children of the Forest are immune to winter attrition, so I'm able to send them north, through the snows, to pursue the Hunnic horde there. The remainder of my forces in Central Europe remain around Casurgis, and I spend some of the money upgrading the Germanic horsemen to noble horsemen that are now available from the freshly researched heavy cavalry tactics. Diplomatically, few options are available to me due to the recent political screw-up/game glitch that banished my central administration to Casurgis. However, the neighboring Thuringians are more than willing to offer us a small trade agreement, and I reset my military target on the King of the Huns, who's somewhere far to the east. With the Huns pushed back for the moment, most of my problems are now around Antioch and Edessa, so I reform the Giants, who were recently vanquished by Attila, as a new army under the leadership of Attila, a 32-year-old with no prior command but a stern taskmaster like the former general of the Giants, Attila. During the intern phase, the Sassanids finally take advantage of my reluctance to garrison Amida, sending a small force to assault the city. The virtually non-existent city garrison is unable to pose any obstacle to the attacking army, so I simply allow the Sassanids to run roughshod over the settlement. They choose not to recapture it, instead sacking it for all the wealth it's worth, no doubt to fund their military rebuilding. The Thuringians, enthused about our recent diplomatic entreaty, offer us a military alliance, and I'm happy to agree since their leader Gotzelin is reliable and defensive in nature. He'll likely be a valuable ally against the Huns. Britain also offers us a military alliance, and I counter with a proposal for them to break their treaty with the Franks. I would really like to isolate the Franks so I can finish them off once and for all, once the Hunnic invasions have been dealt with. Unfortunately, Britain are not ready to turn on their old ally, so no agreement is reached. The Madness have proven an apt name for Vithericus' army, since they're driving me crazy again, spreading the consumption from their army to the city. I could simply surrender the city to the Sassanids, but I otherwise have little choice except to leave Vithericus and his army near the city, with each alternately playing the role of disease vector for the other. Hermenegild tracks down the last Hunnic horde north of Casurgis, the Fury of the Steppe, who are weakened from their battle with the Angles. The Children of the Forest, unimpeded by the snow, are able to pursue and kill the Huns, although I did lose a unit of Germanic spearmasters in the process. The small Sassanid force that sacked Amida, the executors of the fires, swiftly moved south to cross the river and strike at Saphrax's weakened army at Antioch. Saphrax fortunately is able to evade the enemy, falling back further into our own territory. There's still no activity from the Huns, other than a solitary horde wandering and raiding in the desolate wastes of Eastern Europe. We make it back to our own turn essentially without incident, although I learn that Amida was again sacked by a small Sassanid army, although there was very little left for them to try to take from the settlement. I've tried to find a suitable husband for Comina Flavia Attila, and I decided on Vithericus, the young mercenary commander who has steadfastly held to the defense of Edessa, whatever his motives. She doesn't seem particularly enthused about the prospect, but I expend a little of Genseric's waning influence to make the pairing a reality. I was hoping that Vithericus would be able to take advantage of her cunning and authority bonuses, but it looks like it isn't working, since he only seems to be getting the stats from his skill increases. I'm not sure if this is because she isn't technically on the family tree, and this also again seems to cause my young general to vanish off the list of nobles, presumably because Flavia Attila is of Eastern Roman origin. Vithericus is already notoriously untrustworthy, mercenary commander that he is, and I'm afraid that I may have exacerbated the situation by marrying him into the Eastern Roman family tree, although he remains sufficiently loyal for now. With the public order finally stabilized at Macedonia, I am able to move Genseric's fleet out to a military port so I can retrofit the Larchan prows with some decent ships. There's also an ongoing public order problem at Alexandria, to which I don't have an immediate solution, although I'm able to slow the decline by leaving the province untaxed for the time being. Argebaud, who has quickly become the bane of the Sassanids, swoops around behind the executors of the fires at Antioch, who are unable to retreat, and destroys them with the Solitude. We finally cleaned up most of the Sassanid threat around Edessa, except for the tiny army at Nisibis, so I'm able to begin rebuilding my armies, adding some slingers and cavalry to the giants, who add their strength to the defense of Edessa, and beginning the recruitment of the more expensive but valuable Swabian swordsmen for the Thunder and Lightning, who remain under the pall of consumption at Antioch for now. Scarilo is keeping up the pressure on the scions of Xerxes at Ankara, and their commander, Abasgia, has nearly decimated them out of existence, but their loyal team remains attached to their general, still hanging by a thread.
Attila, many of the men are requesting their freedom to worship the Christian God. It seems they have taken to heart the words of the Vandal priestess from Ankara.
No, they will not be allowed to worship the false gods of our enemy. This ridiculous pantheon, with the Virgin Mother and the Divine Son. They have driven our people out of their cities, and they are truly servants of Ahriman.
But the men demand this, so they will desert the army, or perhaps even usurp your command.
I know how the Romans deal with this. It is called decimation. 10 men draw straws, and the unlucky short straw is clubbed to death by his 9 companions. We will do this, and the men will learn discipline from this lesson. Law and order are the ways of the Ahura.
But sir, the regiments are quite depleted. How do we practice this decimation if a regiment numbers fewer than 10 soldiers?
More questioning your commander, Argebaud. I do not think we will need to draw straws from your regiment to decide who is clubbed to death.
Gripas has finally uncovered new Hunnic hordes in Hercynia, harassing the defenders of Ume and revealing 2 more to the north. The small Sassanid army from Nisibis finally moves in and takes Amida, which is actually not much of a loss for us at this point, since the town is mostly a pile of rubble by now. A Sassanid Zoroastrian holy man moves in to confront Hethan at Amida, and we don't yet receive a message about what transpired, but Hethan ominously disappears from the campaign map. However, by the time it's our turn again, I'm very dismayed to find that the enemy's agent betray attempt was a critical success, and has claimed the life of our scout, who has been with the faction since the very early days. Fortunately, our income has been less of a problem lately, but it will be very difficult to replace his unique builder skill that was invaluable, particularly in the early days of the campaign. In small recompense, Sindarid is able to assault and kill the Zoroastrian priest, avenging the death of his comrade. And at Constantinople, I start the long and arduous process of training another scout from scratch, hiring a new spy master named Dromiate. I'm still regrouping my forces at Edessa, but Gismus and his Brothers of Stone are now near full strength and ready to press northward. Gismus renews the war with the Caucasian separatists at Tyrus, laying siege to the walls of their settlement, while Liuva brings the Black Waters in by sea to assault the port. The combined strength is sufficient to capture the city and destroy the defenders, leaving another settlement under our control and another faction eradicated at the hands of the Vandals. We finished work on weapon mastery, and I want to finally start working on Vandal martial culture that will start all of our new recruits with additional experience level, will unlock the Tier 4 military port that's required for military and divine victory conditions, and will unlock the last of our top tier units, finally including the mounted Vandal warlord to replace my god-awful Germanic nobles that have led my armies for the entire campaign up to this point. Back in Europe, Kyrillos, Venethaharis, and Trapstila continue shadowing the movements of the new Hunnic hordes that have appeared in Hercynia. To the west at Casurgis, Gripas is going to make his father Gunderic proud by starting a long process of recapturing the trade revenue that was lost. This will require making a path from Casurgis to the port settlement of Aquileia, which in turn will connect to Carthage and most of our lost trade partners throughout the Mediterranean. Unfortunately, this means recolonizing the desolate regions between Casurgis and the coast, of which there are a few. The Carrion Crows colonize the first region, Severia, and I start building the settlement structure there. With Gripas' weakened army vulnerable to the nearby Huns, Indolf and Hermenegil bring their own armies up to reinforce their cousin.
Is there nothing else?
Impossibly, even more Sassanids show up at the border of Edessa, forcing Argebaud to flee back toward the city, but fortunately he's able to escape his attackers. The Huns in Eastern Europe withdraw further east without confronting our armies. The Kartli king has taken advantage of Genseric's absence at Constantinople to slip his navy through the Strait of Bosphorus and into the Aegean Sea, where he unfortunately can make mischief at any of my numerous port settlements lining the Mediterranean. At the start of our following turn, consumption is still claiming the lives of soldiers at Edessa, but Vithericus finally catches a break, as his army, free of disease, is allowed to cross the river into Antioch, where they can replenish and recruit. Argebaud fortifies outside the city, and Saphrax garrisons the defenses with the thunder and lightning.
How thou be brave?
Gunderic has finally reached Antioch and takes the opportunity to replace all of his substandard skied longships with the much more desirable heavy marauder ships. The situation at Ankara remains unchanged, for all of Skrilo's efforts have been frustrated, and try as I might, I cannot draw the Asians into the war with the Afrigids, so the tiny decimated force continues its protracted siege of my Anatolian city. The Sassanids do present themselves in strength south of Edessa, attacking Attila and the Giants, who are reinforced by Saphrax. The balance bar isn't terrible, but I've learned to fear the Sassanid archer cavalry, who would likely shred my lightly armed Moorish lancers and skirmisher units, so I reluctantly order the Giants to fall back to the west. The Sassanids fortunately don't have enough movement left to mount a combined attack anywhere, so we make it safely through their turn. There's a little more movement from the Huns this time, who crushed the Venetians in the north of Hercynia, and even more of their hordes are now seen moving in from the east, with at least 4 visible to us now. Fresh off their humiliating defeat, the Venetians seem more inclined to plead with some sense of urgency for a military alliance with us, and I agree, since I really have no quarrel with any of the European factions for the moment with the Huns on the move. The Abasgians too ask for military access, perhaps in anticipation of being forced from their homes in Sarmatia Asiatica, where Attila is evidently laying waste to their holdings. Finally, another diplomatic message comes from the Marcomanns, who are under attack by Pontus, and who request help in this war. I have a non-aggression pact with Pontus, but I feel that the Marcomanns and our mutual ally, the Quadians, who will also likely join the war, are our priority over the aggressor, Pontus, so I agree to join the side of the Marcomanns. Gunderic sets off with his retrofitted fleet from Antioch in pursuit of the Kartli king and his navy. Back at Edessa, I'm able to finally swarm the Sassanid attackers, who are much less fearsome with the full-strength giants and the replenished thunder and lightning joining forces. The game gives me a tremendous advantage on the balance bar here, which feels like more than I deserve. Following the complete destruction of these 2 Sassanid armies, Attila is able to march on the third with his allies, providing a very similar situation on the pre-battle screen, and an even better outcome with the results, once again clearing the area of Sassanid invaders. Gripas brings his colonizing crows west from Severia to Virunum, recolonizing this desolate region as well, and laying still more road from Casurgis to Aquileia. It still hasn't been enough to recapture the trade routes, so I believe I still must recolonize the region east of Augusta Vindelicorum as well. There's much more activity from the Huns this turn, as the 4 hordes near Hercynia keep moving west, and Attila and the 4 others lay siege to the Abasgian-held Anacopia in the Black Sea. Pontus, who perhaps feel betrayed by our participation against them in the war on the Marcomanni, move south from their capital to engage Vatharicus near Antioch. Vatharicus is in no condition to face the Pontus army, and the madness flee across the river from whence they came to Edessa. Saphrax takes the thunder and lightning west from Edessa to counter Pontus's incursion into our territory, soundly thrashing the champions of Olympus in an auto-resolve battle. Instead of following up his victory with the immediate coup de grace, Saphrax takes his army north to Melitene, the Pontus capital city, which is now undefended, while Vatharicus wreaks his revenge on the now depleted champions of Olympus, closing in for the kill with the madness. Following that small victory, Vatharicus goes back to his recruitment of the noble Suebi swordsmen, and we now also have access to the amazing Tier 3 noble Suebi lancers as well. During the end-turn phase, there's movement by the Huns, who divide their 4 armies into 2 pairs, who split up, with one pair heading south, while the Abasgia contend with the ongoing siege by Attila, who's finally in someone else's backyard for a change. The Kartli king remains on his Mediterranean adventure, sailing south from Rhegium and Syracuse. Finally, after our seemingly endless turns of siege, the Avrachids, who have teetered on the brink between all-out mutiny and simply evaporating into thin air, abandon the walls of Ankara and head west. A confrontation between Asia and the Eastern Roman rebels outside Ankara, in which our tiny garrison is a potential participant, arises. I decide to let our small garrison fight in the battle, and our ally wins the day, driving back the rebels and subsequently destroying them in a separate battle, again with help from our tiny garrison. Back in our turn, the Arian Church have continued their persecution of rival faiths, now burning the forests outside Virunum, sacred to the worshippers of Baldur there, causing a decline in their faith, but also sharp opposition from their hardline adherents that remain. Saphrax is able to finally finish his work at Melitene, capturing the city with little difficulty and eliminating the Pontus faction in its entirety. I try to continue recruiting and replenishing forces in the Middle East, which is not only an expensive but a lengthy proposition, now that my best regiments take 2 turns for recruitment. my agents in Eastern Europe, including Benithaharis, Trapstila, Kyrillos, and Hermenegild, hinder and harass the Huns to the extent of their abilities, while the Oath and the Children of the Forest stand guard over Gripas and the Carrion Crows. During the end-turn phase, we catch a glimpse of another sizable Sassanid army, passing rapidly through Arbela on their way to Nisibis and possibly to launch another assault against Edessa. The Huns have finished their bloody work at Sarmatia Adriatica, laying waste to the Abasgian settlement of Anacopia, while the two of their hordes have commandeered naval craft to embark upon the Black Sea, another horde venturing south toward the Abasgians' remaining settlement, and Attila staying contentedly amid the devastation. At the start of the following turn, we find that a former Sassanid satrapy, the Makran, are no more. There's also an assassination plot brewing, and it seems that Gripas is the target, while Saphrax could be the guilty party instigating the plot. Gunderic pays the 20 influence to prepare for the possibility of such a plot being placed into action, but I do not know what the outcome will be. Gunderic moves further west in pursuit of the Kartli king, now nearly in striking distance. I move Sindarid up to Nisibis, finding that indeed there is a full-strength Sassanid army there. I decide to bring Argebaud forward to lay siege to the walls of Nisibis, while Gismus ventures into the desert with the Brothers of Stone, perhaps to strike at Ctesiphon if it's left undefended. The Children of the Forest and the Oath move forward to join with our allies east of Severia in opposing the oncoming Hunnic invasion. Argebaud's siege of Nisibis doesn't last long, as both Sassanid armies attack the Solitude, forcing him back along the river. But just when I think Argebaud has barely escaped to safety, a third, smaller Sassanid army appears out of nowhere to commence the assault, and even worse, both of the armies I thought were out of range for their pursuit are just close enough to join the battle as reinforcements. This is a river crossing battle, and the balance bar looks bad, but I have a chance, so I fight the battle manually. I have lots of the very tough and very deadly Swabian swordsmen, which is about all I have going for me in this battle. I do have a single unit each of Kurdish archers and Germanic longbows, and several skirmishers to pelt the enemy as they try to make the river crossing. I split Argebaud's force into similar-sized armies, with the onager on the left and the cavalry on the right, and the Swabian swordsmen holding each crossing. I commence the battle by ordering the Swabian swordsmen forward to block each crossing, along with the solitary Germanic spearmaster regiment. After that, all I can do is sit back and wait for the enemy to appear, and what happens next is quite surprising, given where the enemy appeared to be on the campaign map, and it's also quite unfortunate. The first enemy we encounter are reinforcements who evidently found a ford somewhere else upstream, and who appear almost instantaneously on the flank of our rightward detachment, smashing into one of my Swabian swordsman regiments. They're followed shortly afterwards by numerous archer cavalry, also on my side of the riverbank, and just as I wheel my men around to face this flank attack, enemies appear again, as out of thin air, on the far bank, and begin pouring through the river crossing. It's at this point that Argebaud, seeing the disaster developing on the far detachment, orders his men to support the failing defense on the right-hand crossing. Fortunately, I have no better troops for holding the line than these Swabian swordsmen, and they severely punish the enemy cavalry who dare to engage them. My own cavalry have moved around the small copse of trees behind the river crossing to approach the enemy flank, and I send them charging forward to blunt the downpour of arrows from the Sassanid archer cavalry. Even though my men are fighting hard and even winning smaller engagements, the enemy force is overwhelming, so it's only a matter of time until they succumb, unless Argebaud arrives in time. A unit of Pushtigan cataphracts gallop along the riverbank toward my archers and skirmishers, who unleash several volleys into the hapless riders, who are routed before their commander can ever issue the order to charge. Nevertheless, still more enemies are pouring through the gap, and yet another regiment of Sassanid cavalry appears to be replacing the routing unit, and they manage to make contact with my archers without taking nearly so many casualties. My own cavalry are doing excellent work on the enemy flank, just crushing one unit after another, but I fear that the enemy spears nearby will cause the engagement to bog down, to the detriment of my men. I try to redirect a unit of Swabian swordsmen to engage the enemy spears to free up my cavalry. The lone regiment of Swabian swordsmen, now holding the river crossing against all odds, drive back the enemy general, but they're unable to bring him down, unfortunately. My skirmishers drive off the Grifpanvar cataphracts, assaulting them through sheer overwhelming firepower, and then turn their attention on the enemy crowding in the frozen river crossing. Argebaud and his men have nearly arrived, but they're tired, and the heavy armor of the swordsmen and the drifts of snow are slowing the men down. We've done tremendous damage to the enemy, but there are just too many of them, seemingly endless horsemen pouring in from the river crossing in the right flank. We then receive word of the death of the enemy general, and it seems we might just be able to pull off a victory, given the mass rout already underway. As Argebaud and his men arrive, I send all of the infantry I have to plug the river crossing, while my cavalry contend with the remnants of the enemy on this side of the river, although they're quite fatigued and depleted from the ongoing fighting, dispatching yet another fresh unit of cataphracts. As my Swabian swordsmen move into the river crossing, the enemy smartly pull back with their numerous archer units, emptying their arrow quivers into my heavy infantry regiments. As my cavalry finish off the cataphracts, they rush toward the Kurdish archers, but the horses are already losing their nerve, and as I've noted before, the Kurdish archers are tougher than they look. I pull my swordsmen back to my side of the river, tempting the enemy to cross, but still more enemy cataphracts, and worse, a regiment of Indian elephants are now bearing down on my flank, with my own missile troops occupied with the horse archers in the crossing, and my cavalry wiped out by this point. In a stroke of good luck, however, both the elephants and the enemy cataphracts break, just as they meet my forces. The only trick now will be surviving the assault of the missile cavalry with my infantry in such a depleted state. Arrows pour in from all sides, and there's just no way I can counter the enemy missiles with my own given the current state of the affairs. Still more Indian elephants approach the river crossing, and these elephants unfortunately don't break, but rather their appearance is the nail in the coffin for Argebaud and the Solitude, as the few Swabian swordsmen left can take no more, and flee the battlefield as Argebaud himself is trampled underfoot by the terrifying beasts. It's called a close defeat, but I consider this a valiant stand by Argebaud and his men under the circumstances. A few men of the Solitude escape the battle without their commander, but we soon find that the Sassanids are not yet out of movement for the turn, as one of their larger armies tracks down and annihilates what remains of the Solitude. The Huns continue converging on my forces in Europe, now at least 5 hordes visible in the nearby area. Britain again asks for a military alliance, and I again make them the same offer. I will agree if they sever their relationship with the Franks. This time, they agree to the proposal. We'll leave the story here for now. We managed to chase Attila back east once again, with the help of our Jute allies, but Attila has always managed to conjure up more and more of his horsemen, who even now close in on our holdings in Central Europe. Argebaud, who ravaged the Western Roman separatist holdings in Eastern Europe, distinguished himself even further with numerous victories over the Sassanids, but tragedy struck yet again as the Sassanids avenged themselves upon the Solitude, killing the brave and talented young general in a river-crossing battle eerily similar to the clash that led to the downfall of Saphrax the Pious. Gunderic has been able to make ends meet even without the lucrative trade income from prior agreements, but his son Gripas labors to rebuild the old Roman roads south of Casurgis that the imperial trade might be revitalized. The soldiers of the empire, tired and battered from countless wars, look to Gunderic to find a solution to end the bloody conflicts, but the Huns are seemingly without end, and the Sassanids are legion. With the holy cities reclaimed in the Middle East, and the non-believers ground under the heel of the Arian Church authority, surely God will relent and withdraw his scourge from the world. Thanks for watching, and join me again next time for another episode of March to the Sea.